Hey folks, John Peterson here, and today I want to talk to you about something that doesn't really get talked about a lot, and that is setting your white points and your black points in your images when you're developing them. Now, there's a lot of different ways to do it, and you can do this in many different applications, but this is one of the first things that I do when I start my development process. I'll go in and I'll clean up some noise. I will do some cropping if I need to, not much. But then I will go through and start to set some of the foundational levels of tonality in my image. And by that, I mean I will work on light and dark values and get the tonality of the shot feeling the way I want it to before I go in and start doing targeted adjustments and color, vibrance, saturation, all that kind of good stuff. So setting your black point and your white points is one of the easiest ways to set a really good foundation in your photograph. What it does is that it'll make adjustments to your image until you have a true white value and a true black value. Now, why do you want this? Well, an image that has many of the values of the zone system, and I'll talk about that in just a second, is a lot more alive. It's a lot more vibrant, a lot more punchier, a lot more dynamic than an image that only uses 3 or 4 or 5 of the zones of this zone system. Now, you don't need to learn a lot about the zone system, but it is important to understand it, and it's a great way to talk about tonality in an image. Now, the zone system here that you're seeing on your screen is a photographic technique for determining optimal film exposure and development, which was originally formulated by Ansel Adams and Fred Archer. And each zone in this system corresponds to a specific tonal value and exposure adjustment. Now, why that's important for us, especially in the digital age, is it helps us identify areas of our photograph ranging from pure black over here on the left to pure white on the right. And when we have an image that contains a lot or many or most of these zones, it looks and feels like a richer, more dynamic image. And it helps color, it helps saturations, it helps sharpness, it helps a lot of these things. Now, I don't want to get into a big discussion about the zone system and digital photography, all that kind of good stuff. Today's video is really about how to expand your photograph to create a decent foundation to build upon for all future edits. And I do that using the black and white sliders in Lightroom. Now, this works in Photoshop, Camera Raw, Lightroom, Capture One. Any editing program should have black sliders and white sliders for you to set your white point and your black point. And ideally, when I say black point or white point, that's setting a specific part of my image to be pure black or pure white. And if I do that, then there's a good chance every other tonal value in my image will span this zone system and be fully represented. So let's go ahead and jump into the system and take a look at what I'm talking about and a little bit about how you make these adjustments. Okay, let's start off with this particular image. This was shot in Greenland last year. Wonderful image, but notice that it's relatively flat. I have not done any processing to this image. It is straight out of the camera, and this is what I'm dealing with. Now, if we look up at the histogram, notice that the majority of the information is contained in the center of the photograph, or the center of the histogram, sorry. And this is why this image looks flat. I would like it to have a little bit more dynamic feeling to it, a little bit more captivating. So for me to do that, I need to raise the whites and lower the blacks. And ideally, I could set a point so something in this scene is pure white and something is pure black. But that doesn't always work out right for your image, and let me show you why. But really what I want to do is I want to extend or stretch out this histogram so it encompasses more tones along this histogram. So if I take my white slider here in the develop module and start to move it to the right, watch my histogram. See how more information is being added over there to the right? Now look at the brights, right? I've gone from this flat image to brights that stand out a whole lot more. And conversely, I can take my blacks and stretch this out a little bit. And wow, I went from this to this real quick. Whole lot more dynamic. There's a lot more depth and dimensionality to this image just by making that simple adjustment. And to reset the sliders, I can just double click on whites or double click on blacks, and that works. So this is oftentimes what I will do. I will just sort of manually, based upon what I want out of my image, I will manually adjust these sliders. And notice, let's watch the lights here. Notice when I move the whites all the way to the right, see this little triangle above the cursor, how that lights up? That shows that I am clipping information. I've got information that's so bright it has lost detail. And if I hover over this, you can see on my screen, those are the areas in red where I have lost all detail. It is just pure white. So what I can do is toggle that back a little bit until that triangle does not illuminate any longer. See? And the same thing's true in the black area. I can cram this all the way to the black where I have things that are clipped, where I've lost detail in the blacks. And so essentially the histogram is telling me I am clipping areas, and it's really small, the areas that I'm clipping. Let's go even further. Those are the areas that are clipped now in the blacks. And I really don't want to lose a lot of detail. One of the tricks you can use is you can hold down the Option or Alt key while you move the slider. So I hold down the Option key and I hold down the left mouse button, and notice the screen turns black. And I can start sliding the slider out. And as things start to illuminate on the screen, those are areas that are starting to clip. So those are clipping in the white. Now let go of the mouse button and this is what I get. Same thing happens when I do it on the blacks. Hold down the Option key, left mouse button, slide to the left, and here the blacks are starting to clip. And the downside of that is that when you have this mask overlay on, you cannot see the image and the adjustments. So sometimes I'll be making this adjustment, I'll do this and I'll go, ooh, I don't like it once I see the image again. So then I can sort of manually dial it back how I want. But here I've just created this just amazing photograph with simply stretching out my histogram. Now here's one final thought about clipping highlights and shadows. When we clip or run off the edges of the histogram, we lose detail. We lose visual detail. And for us as humans, we don't like it when we clip the highlights. When we lose visual detail in the highlights, it doesn't look good. It doesn't feel good. People generally don't respond well to that. However, when we clip the blacks and lose detail, we are more acceptable or accepting of that fact. We are okay with losing detail in shadows, but not in highlights. So sometimes I will push the clipping a little bit further in the blacks than I will in the highlights. I just want to protect those highlights, make sure I don't lose any detail whatsoever. So I can double click both of those to reset it, and then here's the last little trick, is that if I hold down my Shift key and double click the word white, the system will automatically set it where it thinks it needs to be, right before clipping, but bright enough to really expand the histogram. The same thing holds true with black. So I hold down the shift key and I double click, and it's set a pure black. And in this case, I don't like what the system did. So I will tend to bring that back a little bit because I want more detail and more information in these mountains. All right, let's take a look at this image on the Oregon coast. And when I look at my histogram, I can see I've got a pretty good spread of information. I've got almost all the way to the black, and I've definitely got all the way to the white. Is so much so that this triangle is illuminated. Of course, shooting directly to the sun, I expect some of the highlights to blow out. So what I can do is I can either bring down my whites. Yeah, I'm not sure I like that much, but in this case, let's bring down the highlights. And I can bring it down so much so that I'm not clipped there. So I know that I've got a lot of white information already. Now what I want to do is just add a little bit of black to give some solidness and foundation to the image. If I reset that, hold down the Option key and slide, let's see what happens. You can see I start to blow out this rock, starts to get pure black where I've lost all the detail. And again, that's okay because in this image, I want this to be silhouetted. The rock is not super important, so I don't mind a silhouette. So real quickly, I've really done a great job stretching out this histogram. Now let's take a look at one final example. This is the famous black church over in Iceland. And let's go ahead and see if we can do the shift double click and see what happens. So if I double click on whites, it raises it up. Double click on blacks. Ooh, look at this. It actually increased my blacks instead of normally decreasing them. Why was that? If we go back and look at the original image, notice that I'm clipping. And I'm really only clipping under the dark shadows in the eaves, which isn't that much of a problem. But the system recommended I add some blacks into this so I no longer clip. And I can bring my whites up a little bit, just like that. And I've got this great spread of information across my image. All right, there you go. There's a couple of quick ways to set your white levels and your black levels in Lightroom. Hopefully you can see why it's important to do it. Really having rich, deep blacks adds depth and dimension into your photograph. It's a great foundation. Plus having enough highlights really makes the image jump and pop. And then having a full histogram with information really sets the stage for you making future edits of this image. Color, saturation, vibrance, tonality, whatever it may be, having a good tonal foundation for your photograph is essential for seamless, wonderful edits down the road. All right, if you like this video, please feel free to hit that subscribe button, tickle the bell, do all that kind of good stuff. Thanks for watching, happy shooting, and have a great day. Bye-bye.